Ready? Cheers, Worcester. It's January the 30th, 2018, and this is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti, and this is Brendan Milliken.
How's it going, Mike?
Brendan, it's going good. It's going good. Today we're talking about paperwork bans, pay raises, conflicts and mistakes, population density, economic development, and Groundhog Day. We are broadcasting on Worcester's Unity Radio, 0.0000001 gigawatts of power on 102.9 FM, cable casting on WCCA TV 194, and podcasting at pieandcoffee.org. The call-in number is 508-471-5265. Please, God, don't call in. These call-ins are always driving me nuts. But if you want to drive me nuts, 508-471-5265. And a special shout-out to the mighty Hank Stoltz, who is engineering today's show. Brendan, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me back up.
Well,
it's nice to join you again, Mike.
Thanks for having me join you too. You know, Brendan, one person who was listening to the show suggested that we should, for our new radio audience, introduce ourselves and maybe explain who we are and what we're doing.
Do we know who we are and what we're? That's a big question. It's a very heady question.
I feel like I know who we are and what we're doing. I don't know that there's a. I don't know that I understand who we are and what we're doing in a way that would actually increase the credibility or appeal of this show.
Yeah. No. Well, you take a stab at that. I'll take your lead.
So my name is Michael Benedetti, and I have lived in Worcester for about 16 years. I originally came up to Worcester to do volunteer work with homeless people and have stuck on and mostly do technology things. I do a lot of activism and amateur journalism things in my spare time, and I used to blog a lot back in the day when people used to blog a lot, and that was how I got connected to you, and I got interested in podcasting. And my only credibility is, I don't know, maybe as somebody who's not a lifer but who's lived here for a while. And somebody who's talked to a lot of people in Worcester.
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised here, and this is really the only place my family's lived since they got to this side of the pond. Mm-hmm. But it's similarly, I think almost 10, 15, maybe even closer to 20 years ago at this point, started getting a little bit more interested in the more civic aspects of life in Worcester. And somehow we managed to cross paths. And I think we've been working together in some capacity in various forms of media since then. And here we are on the radio having bizarre conversations about things that people might not even realize are happening right under their nose.
Yeah. I would say that we're sort of like two guys whose hobby is like a lot of people will own a boat and they'll spend some spare time working on their boat, and when new boat technology comes along, they'll do that, and they'll do like boat clubs and stuff. And we have a similar thing with broadcasting.
But you know what I think is that is true. But I think what I think is been one consistent sort of theme in everything that we've done is while at times it can seem like we're knocking the city of Worcester or being critical, I always think it comes from a very sort of loving, respectful place. We fumble a little bit on the respectful side of things, but for the most part, it comes from a very well-intended and well-intentioned point, which is, I think, is important to keep in mind too. Even when it sounds like we might be knocking your favorite thing in the city,
we're really good people.
Yeah.
We're
trying anyway.
We're just some of the best people in the city. And I would say also, even though it oftentimes seems like we're making very strong libertarian arguments for something, this is usually accidental. This is why we call ourselves Worcester's Libertarian Voice.
Yeah, we're actually, and I don't think either of us are actually that, but unfortunately I think anytime we try and have a measured, self-moderated conversation about something, you kind of end up coming back to that sort of natural middle point where you realize it's just not that much fun to stake a hard edge sort of ground on any particular topic. And
Well, speaking of hard edge grounds on particular topics, I want to get into the headlines. This week's headlines, and just touch on everything real quick, and then we can talk about things in a little more detail. This week, the City Council is talking about pay raises, specifically whether they should talking about pay raises. They currently get a pay raise in line with increases in the consumer price index, that is, increases in the cost of living, and it's an automatic thing. And Councillor Lukes and to a lesser extent Councillor Rosen would like to take away the automatic part of it and say that they have to actually debate it and have a big thing about it every 2 years instead of just taking the raises. Or in some cases, people don't take the raises. And this doesn't drive me crazy. This seems bizarre to me. I should mention that the amount of money that we're talking about with these pay raises is 0.004% of the city's annual budget. Considering half the city's budget is school related and a huge percentage of the city's budget, probably like 80-90% of the city's budget is non-discretionary. Of the discretionary funds, the funds the council can actually have some say over, it's probably a lot more than 0.004%. But just for the sake of argument, say it is actually 0.004% of the city's budget. If you assume that being a city councilor was a full-time 40-hour-a-week job, that would mean that a city councilor should spend 4.8 minutes a year thinking / talking / voting on this. This is way out of whack to the budgetary impact. I think it's because this is mostly about questions about what is the nature of a city councilor. Like, should this basically be a volunteer job? You know, like what is the? But it never is framed in the sense of should this be basically a volunteer job, or what's a good price to pay for having a bunch of professional ombudsmen blanketing our neighborhoods and doing research. Instead, it's always put in this perspective of, well, I care about, I'm a good person, and I care about the budget of Worcester, so I will turn down my 0.004% of the budget of Worcester because I'm good and you're terrible, venal, corrupt politics.
Which really fixes nothing. It doesn't change anything in terms of the actual math year to year from a budgetary perspective.
Yeah, and it actually makes me think that you're less of a good person too. Like honestly, I think Connie Lukes is a very good person, but in terms of virtue signaling, Connie Lukes' virtue signaling is aimed at people besides me. It always makes me think she's terrible. Her public things.
I
think she's a very, very good person, though.
I'm just going to throw this out really quick, but I never understood why we tie pay raises for, especially elected officials, right, to things like indexes that impact everybody on the other side of the employment scale as well, too. Like, because you're talking about the one role that is filled by people where it's not just that we hope for, we kind of demand by virtue of voting for you good outcomes. And living in a system that at least currently is a capitalist system, those good outcomes oftentimes involve money, revenue streams, whatever the case may be. It would seem that it'd make a lot more sense just to tie that number into, say, the median household or family income, and sometimes that goes down, right? And
I think that potentially does weird things to the incentives for a city councilor. Like, it really gives you an incentive to try to kick as many poor people as possible out of the city. That's a way easier way to raise the median income than do economic development.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's likely. Like, I don't think the likelihood of the council getting together and running everybody out of town.
No, but that incentive is that. You're giving them a small incentive to kick poor people out.
The flip side now, though, is there's kind of an incentive. There's no incentive to do anything. If we're going to do the game theory thing, then like there's no incentive to do anything because you're going to get that increase anyways, well, as long as Councillor Lukes gets her way, unless she gets her way, that increase just comes along. So, like, from the game theory perspective, then there's no incentive to do anything but just kind of sit around and keep it even keel.
I think what you're saying is that the salary part of it is not an incentive for you. The salary part is an incentive maybe to run for the job, but the incentive is to get reelected to the job, or to have other people like you, or to feel like you're being effective or whatever. Those are the incentives. It makes sense to me to take that financial part of it and say, there's no. I mean, to me, this is just like property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, property taxes cause so many weird economic distortions in our city, and there's so much time spent, right, like trying to assess properties and figure out exactly what this costs and what did this road do for the value of this property. Which is only important because of property taxes. Like, when we take that away, then suddenly it's like, it's worth what people paid for it. You haven't sold it in 50 years. Who the hell cares what it's worth this year, right? I feel like this is one area where that's actually, that seems like a reasonable, it seems a reasonable thing for me for the council to discuss what they're going to get paid every 2 years. Sure, why not? But except that it's just such a tiny drop in the bucket.
It really doesn't matter.
And it's never and like I said, it's never focused around the real question, which is what's the nature of a city councilor. It's focused on who can act more benevolent.
In a very backhanded sort of way. It's actually a conversation about it's a conversation amongst themselves about what they're worth. about their perceived value. And that's a weird thing to kind of be an observer of, is like a group of people sitting around a room saying, this is what we're worth to the city of Worcester. That's typically up to the city of Worcester to decide.
Well, anyway, so there's more city council stuff this week. You might guess that will be the entire meeting, but you would be wrong. The city council, last week we talked a little bit about what I'm going to call Gary Rosen's dream van. The idea that we should have a van of paperwork driving around the city to help people who don't have internet access or can't get to City Hall to do their city paperwork. This idea came about because Boston has such a van. Now let's point out, Boston has a van. A city which is 5 times as large as Worcester is able to support a van as a pilot project. Maybe we can have a fifth of a van. I don't know. We can timeshare a van with some other towns. I don't know.
A wheelbarrow?
It's an old bomb squad van,
Yeah.
which is sweet. If we had an old bomb squad van to repurpose for this, I would say let's do it. And it has like some laptops and some chairs inside, and it's basically like it stops by your neighborhood's community center, and you go in and you do your paperwork. This is something which I think that this already happens, which is people will go around the city with a laptop and say, hey, I know you need to do some city paperwork. Use this laptop.
Yeah, and not just for City Hall. I actually was listening to the station that we are on yesterday when Tim Garvin was up talking about how that's one of the projects the United Way does here in Worcester, is work with the IRS to make sure that folks that don't have easy access to filing their taxes, that like the United Way is there to make sure that. And I think that's actually where this conversation gets a little bit weird. You know, even beyond the fair comparisons to like Boston, and do we actually have the geographical and population needs to make this happen? But sometimes I think it's there's a lot of great things that could be updated in City Hall from a process perspective, where you're going to look a little bit further down the line and say, you know, this is going to be the day 10 years from now that just everything's going online, or whatever the case may be. And you can't get too hung up on the folks that might be slightly left out or inconvenienced by that. Like, I'm sure at some point in time, the IRS has had to figure out a creative way to make sure the Amish can file their taxes, since e-filing became a thing. But they didn't say, well, no, we can't change anything. Like, nobody can e-file because the Amish aren't going to be able to. Like, you figure out a healthy solution that isn't, stagnating government as a whole. And I'm not suggesting that a bus is the same thing as, bringing everything to a screeching halt. But I think it does bear a longer and a bigger conversation about, like, who are the folks that we're perceiving as not being able to access government in a meaningful way, and what is the most meaningful way to make sure that they're brought into the fold.
Well, the city council changed the proposal around a little bit, and they asked for a report on whether or not we could somehow use our bookmobile to do part of this. Which, I don't know that there's that much space left in the bookmobile. I guess you're going to have to get rid of some books to be able to put this into the bookmobile. But it feels to me like it defeats the purpose, because the bookmobile is cool, right? But like
especially now, it has a new mural on the outside.
It looks
it's
great.
One of the coolest
It looks great, and it's a bookmobile. So we need a bomb squad van, man. If we don't have a bomb squad van, we shouldn't do it. Or this Boston bus has sweet decals. I say we find out, we go to Councilor Rosen, and we're like, the city will buy you decals for your car. As long as you promise that if anybody ever stops you in traffic and asks you to help them with paperwork, you will.
You'll give it to them. You'll keep it
and
in the
that way
trunk.
we'll have the vehicle. It'll be out there. It'll say Worcester to go on the side. It'll be awesome. Gary will be in there smiling and waving, chatting people up. Everybody wins. Very, very cheap solution. We don't screw up the bookmobile.
And there's not going to be any sad, tragically disappointed children who go into the bookmobile and instead just find a bunch of census forms and applications for dog licenses.
Oh man, I was a nerdy kid. I love this stuff. I would have been so into that when I was a kid. We have a couple minutes left here in this top part of the show, so I'll talk a couple more things the city council is looking at. Councilor Toomey would like to ban flavored tobacco. Councilor Bergman wants to make sure the city is marketing residential properties to non-residents. I think that's pretty much it. Both of those, I don't know, I feel like both of those are among these evergreen topics that I feel a little bit bad even talking about them, because I'm just like, why is this the week that you're bringing up another flavored tobacco ban?
That's as a former tobacco user and a current flavored nicotine product user in the form of vaporized nicotine oils.
Will this affect you?
Well, it actually does. Unintentionally, yes, because in the Commonwealth we describe or define all nicotine products as tobacco derivatives, even though that's questionable from because they're not actual nicotine, whatever.
Sure.
So yeah, in theory it would. But the thing that I just don't understand, we went through this with, I think the easier one is when it comes to edibles, when we were starting to go down the legalization road with marijuana, right? People go crazy when they find out that there's candy or cookies or whatever that can be infused with marijuana products.
Right.
I am so suspicious of adults who think that once you leave childhood, like things that taste good or are delicious are no longer allowed in your life. And that's what this is saying to me, right? Like that we feel that these tobacco products must be targeting children because what adult would be interested in flavored tobacco? Well, have you ever smoked tobacco? It's awful. Like, of course you want to flavor it. And when I'm not familiar with this universe where adults are only seeking out things that taste terrible. So yeah, I just don't get what the point is there. I mean, there's, smoking rates decline when you do good education programs for kids and get them to realize the horrors of nicotine and tobacco, which, we didn't do a good job when I was a kid, which is why I spent a couple of years, a good portion of my life addicted to nicotine.
The only people who I know smoke flavored tobacco are old men.
Sure.
Like, I feel like these young kids are all smoking weed. Like, they don't care. They're not interested in flavored tobacco one way or the other. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not in touch with the youth demographic. I mean, I know that I'm not, so I could be totally wrong.
No, well, I think ultimately that's the real thing, is that nobody smokes, right? Like, you look nationally, the rates of youth smoking are all but gone. The only people that are left in those demographics, unfortunately, are the folks that don't have good education presented to them young about the dangers of smoking, and those of us that are on the back nine, who unfortunately made terrible decisions when we were 12. But kids, that's like, it's not the fear anymore. There's just so much better, the outcomes are so much better when you actually focus on education. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave that there, as they say on CNN. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about Groundhog Day. We're going to talk about the Paw Sox. We're going to talk about Whole Foods in a little bit.
Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about ourselves too. I kind of like that part.
We might. This is 508, a show about Worcester, and we will be right back. All right.
I know we're still recording here.
People at home, how did that audio turn out? Oh crap! I used the Mevo for that audio. All right,
Be clicky. You'll be fine.
That audio was terrible. Well, I'm not going to record anymore on this video. All right, guys. You know how to get a hold of us. pieandcoffee@gmail.com. Now you can see me. pieandcoffee@gmail.com. We're doing a lot of experimentation with our video, so we'll be doing some more experimentation next week as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.